Okay, Mark Rogers, TV, back with you for round two of the NFL draft, and I slugged it through by myself last night through round one, but we've got the expert back with us, Brent Carlstrom, out of hibernation. He just wanted to kick back and enjoy the first round, but we've got him working tonight for the second round and hopefully beyond of the NFL draft. Brent, how are you tonight?
We'll call it a contract holdout. I was looking for double my salary. Mark finally gave in.
I had to give in. After the performance last night, we showed that we certainly could not do it without you. So let's start at the top of the second round, much like we started with the top of the draft with the Houston Texans. With that 2-14 record, they get the honors with Xavier Sua-Filo, the guard out of UCLA. Supposed to be a very nasty player, Brent.
Yeah, nasty guy. I think he was the top-rated guard on most people's boards. He's the typical mauler. He has a real good chance to start as a rookie. But I think with the Houston pick, the bigger news is what they didn't do versus what they did do. They're in need of a guy to throw the ball, and they did not pull the trigger on Derek Carr, the next quarterback taken. You can understand that, but I'm a big redemption guy. I would have loved a redemption story there.
Yeah, it would have been a story, no question about that. Of course, his brother going in 2002 as the Houston Texans' first ever selection. Philo, yes, nasty. I didn't know that they produced them nasty out in Westwood or Brentwood, California, in those powder blue uniforms. But that's the prospect on Mr. Philo. All right, the Dallas Cowboys moved up, trading with their arch rivals, the Washington Redskins, to draft 34th and go with DeMarcus Lawrence, a big kid out of Boise State, a defensive end, 20.5 tackles for loss, 10.5 sacks, Brent.
I don't think he's the 34th best player in this draft, Mark, and because of that, I don't know why Dallas trades up to get him. That's a typical Jerry Jones maneuver, I guess. He falls in love with guys, fell in love with this guy. He's that typical tweener, defensive end in college, will have to play in the outside linebacker position in that Dallas front. So when they moved up, I thought they were going after Carr, as an eventual replacement for Romo. That didn't happen, so I thought it was a lot to give up for a guy that I had slated later in the second, maybe early in the third myself.
Now at pick 35, the Cleveland Browns, considering the situation with Josh Gordon, many thought that they could possibly take Marqise Lee in this position. Instead, they go with a guard out of Nevada in Joel Bitinio.
Well, the interesting thing about this pick is all during the day today, the news was that your wide receiver there, Josh Gordon, did I get that right?
Yes.
Not the name guy.
Josh Gordon.
Was tweeting that he wanted to play with Marqise Lee. So the thought was this would be the pick to kind of make him happy. And then the news comes out that Gordon might be suspended all of next year, and Lee wasn't the pick. So they made up with neither of the two guys catching the ball for them. So they went with the Bitinio. I like Bitinio a lot. He's a very versatile guy. He can really play any position on the line. So in the league nowadays where you're trying to cover for injuries and be scheme diverse, he's going to be a good player there on the offensive line.
All right, Brent. Well, the Texans couldn't pull the trigger on a quarterback. The Oakland Raiders did at pick 36 with Derek Carr, a quarterback that I believe that you really like.
Well, it's gonna be hard for me to convince my little ones that once upon a time the Oakland Raiders didn't know how to draft football players. But this is not your father's Oldsmobile anymore, Mark. Reggie McKenzie is really kind of turning the culture around in Oakland, and I think they've had an outstanding draft. If they would have taken Derek Carr in the first round, I would have thought that was a good pick. So to get him at number 36 overall, wow, this so far to me is the steal of the draft. I think the guy can do that cliche, make all the throws, but beyond that, he's a leader. He's got that moxie. Maybe his one knock is he sees the pass rush coming. That was knock on his brother, so maybe they're misapplying that to him. I don't know. I love the pick, though.
The two best defenses that Carr faced last season, Utah State and the most talented USC, he seemed to have issues with the pass rush and letting the throws go maybe a half step or a half second earlier than he needed to wait for the receiver to cut open. Ra-Shede Hageman is a player that on the draft boards, at least that I frequent, was much higher in the selection process, looked to be in that 20 to 25 range. He slides down to 37 to Atlanta. I saw him play Nebraska, and he looked like Reggie White. Now, he obviously doesn't look like Reggie White every week from what I understand.
Well, it's that cliche about defensive linemen. He takes plays off. He's boom or bust. He brings it, then his motor runs hot and cold. I mean, what defensive lineman can you not say that about? That's the thing about him. I mean, he can look all pro one play and then just be wiped out the next. And so that's why he probably slipped into the second round.
If Tampa Bay's making a statement already in this draft, it's that they want to throw the football in 2014 with Lovie Smith on the sideline taking care of the defense. Austin Seferian-Jenkins, the tight end out of Washington, goes to Tampa.
Yeah, I had mixed opinions about him because my team was associated with his name quite a bit, so I looked into him a little bit. He's a bigger tight end, but still has some athleticism. I didn't think the productivity really matched the hype, and he had some foot injuries, kept him out of the combine. So I mixed opinions about that pick as well. I wasn't a big fan of him going number 38 at all. I think his value is probably later in the second round.
Okay, if, and I emphasize if, Blake Bortles can stay upright, he gets a weapon here in Marqise Lee, a guy that a year ago, after the remarkable sophomore season he had in 2012 with 118 catches, I believe, would have been a much higher pick. Suffered without Matt Barkley throwing him the football. They had quarterback issues with Cody Kessler and Max Wittek at USC, but Marqise Lee drops down to Jacksonville at 39.
Well, you nailed it in your analysis there totally, and obviously he's not the biggest guy. He doesn't have the size that some of the guys in the first round did, but his strength, and he didn't run a great 40 time either, Mark, but his strength is yard after catch and really getting open as well, and I really like this pick a lot. He reminds me of so many of the wide receivers that are sort of discounted, and then suddenly they get into the league and they're getting open and making big plays. I think this is a wonderful pick, especially considering you took Bortles number 3 overall.
Marqise Lee does not run as fast as Ted Ginn, but he sure looks a lot like him running with the football down the field with that long stride and with the high leg kicks. All right, at pick number 40, it was Seattle, but the Seahawks must love this crop of 6th and 7th rounders because they keep dropping down in the pecking order. So with the Detroit Lions instead, with Seattle's pick, go with Kyle Van Noy, a guy that I've seen one time play, and that's in the bowl game 2 years ago in San Diego. And he, along with Ziggy Ansah, now currently, of course, playing with the Detroit Lions as well, was all over the field making plays. Very athletic player, Mr. Van Noy.
Grieves me to say it, but one of my chief rivals got one of my favorite players. Seems to happen year after year to me as I watch the draft. So I really wanted Kyle Van Noy on my team. I think this guy can do it all. He's scheme diverse. Okay, that's the kind of new catchphrase in the NFL right now. And he can play inside, he can play outside, he can cover, he can bring the blitz, he can do it all. He's got good size and a suddenness to his game, an anticipation to his game. I'll at least be able to watch him play twice a year, but I'm not going to be happy with the results when I do.
Possibly not. There were some comments made on the set, though, that after having a 13-sack season 2 years ago in 2012, only 4 this past season, not that he wasn't beating the blocker in front of him, but was not wrapping up the quarterback, may need to work on the toughness aspect of the game. He's an athlete, no question about that. He's going to get to the football. St. Louis Rams at pick number 41. Here's a kid that if he was 6 feet tall and 205 pounds, he might be a top 10 player in the NFL draft. I've heard personnel guys in the NFL say that Lamarcus Joyner doesn't have a flaw in his game. He just does not have the build to be that high of a draft pick at 5'8" and like $185.
I might be in the minority here. Everybody seems to love Joyner and love this pick, But when I watched him play, I saw a guy that played a lot of off coverage. I saw a guy who didn't have the productivity to match the hype. I could be wrong about this. But you know what? It's the second round, Mark. So it's not like you're going to live or die with this pick, and he may turn out to be a good player. The second round to me, this is where I would live. If I were a GM in the NFL draft, I would try to accumulate as many second round picks as I could and pick guys like this.
Especially this season, I would think.
Yeah.
All right, at pick 42, the Philadelphia Eagles go with the wide receiver. Chip Kelly loves those wide receivers, of course, in that offense. He goes with Jordan Matthews out of Vanderbilt. Surprisingly, a Vanderbilt wide receiver is the all-time SEC reception leader, 112 this season and all-time in his career. I saw him play one particular game this past season against Ole Miss, and he did everything you would expect a number one receiver at a big-time school to do, except on the final drive of the game, he dropped a key third down conversion that possibly would have moved them inside the 10-yard line to win that game, and they lost to the Rebels. But Jordan Matthews, an exceptional player, and a big wide receiver again. This seems to be the growing trend.
Right, he's the tall guy, he's the big guy. People knocked him for his inability to get open sometimes. I really like the pick there. Does Philadelphia need to trade up and make that pick? I don't know. I think he probably would have fallen down a little bit further. But you're right. You know, the big wide receiver is the trend. This you know, in this NFL, and he certainly fits that mold.
Now, Brent, this next guy, I don't expect you to make any comments about. I'll take it from here. Weston Richburg. I've watched a lot of tape on this Colorado State center. Got a lot to say about him.
I bet you do. Let's sit back and hear it. I want to tell you that you know, I actually have looked into him a little bit, again, because my team is in need of a center, and there was some thought that if he lasted to us in this round, we would look at taking him. So I was kind of sad to see him go off the board. He is the best pure center. If you're looking for a guy who's maybe flexible on the offensive line, he's not your guy. He's just more of that true center. But the problem is he's a good player. I just don't know if the New York Giants had the luxury of taking a center, you know, with the 43rd pick overall in the draft, with so many needs, particularly on defense.
Brent, my son, for the first time, let's say in the last 3 years, but this is really the first year that he's been aware of the draft going into the draft. And he made the comment to me today that these personnel guys in the NFL are obviously just all hard facts. There's no pulse. There's no emotion. It's just let's make the right pick and let's look at the stats and the measurements. And I explained to him, not necessarily the case, son. There is some human quality there. And if Cyrus Kouandijo played at Colorado State, I wonder if he would be the 44th pick in the draft, because I know he's got the measurements in terms of quickness, and you talk about all the drills at the combine and so forth, but he looked horrible in game one against Virginia Tech. And that Oklahoma pass rush made him look awfully silly in the Sugar Bowl.
Well, that is bookend of his season, beginning and the end. He really took a step backward this year. He would have been a first-round draft pick last year, and this year he falls into the second because he did regress this year. And so you're wondering, what am I going to get? Am I going to be able to coach this guy back to what he was in 2012, or am I going to get the guy that I saw in 2013? It's big if. Big butts surrounding him. But, you know, I mean, again, second-round value is probably there for Buffalo. Plus, he's got a really cool name.
He's got a cool name, and they like that name at Alabama. His brother is taking up for him there in Alabama, and a starting offensive lineman with the Tide this season. Okay, the Seattle Seahawks, I kid about them dropping down to the 6th and 7th round. It was just 5 picks down to slot 45 and taking Paul Richardson. The Colorado Buffaloes, not exactly on the college football radar for the past 5 or 10 years or beyond that, but Richardson very productive in Boulder.
Well, certainly, and you know, again, we've discussed in previous spots that this is a very deep draft for wide receivers. Because of that, I thought that Richardson would go further in the draft, deeper in the draft than the upper half of the second round. So you could argue it's a little bit of a reach, but all these wide receivers are going to be, I think, quality guys in the NFL. And if you look at his stats, I mean, this guy averaged over 16 yards a catch. So yard after catch, which is so valuable nowadays, is something that this guy has proven that he can do. Very productive in that program. I like the pick a lot, although maybe a little bit early.
That Notre Dame defensive front seven really got chewed up against Alabama in the championship game. Many people thought they got exposed, and they did to a certain degree, but I think if they would have played 10 times, they would have been much closer football games. They turned out a lot of talent, and this guy right there in Stephon Tuitt, 13 tackles for loss this past season, 12 sacks out of the defensive tackle position 2 years ago, but he has issues with the weight. I'm not going to say he takes plays off because I'm sick of hearing that, but he has had weight issues, but he's an extremely strong football player.
Well, the deal with Tuitt and his teammate Nix, both the guys on the line there at Notre Dame, is 2012, great season, 2013, not quite as good. And you're seeing both of them now fall into the second round or maybe further. The deal with Tuitt, though, is he goes to a team, Pittsburgh, that runs a 3-4 defense, Mark, as you know. And so as a defensive tackle, he's going to kick out and be a defensive end now. He's not going to be asked to rush the passer. He's not going to be asked to make plays in the backfield. So his tape didn't have to represent that. What they're looking for is size. He's a big guy, very tall. I think he comes in over 6'5". But in Pittsburgh's defense, he's going to be asked to contain the offensive line so the linebackers can make plays, and that's the best fit for him.
The Stanford Cardinal have joined the elite of college football just in the last 3 or 4 seasons. That last season or two under Jim Harbaugh, David Shaw has taken over. They've not missed a beat. And again, they've been a top 5-10 program out of nowhere, seemingly. The front seven on defense, the ground game on offense, the front seven on defense has been the reason why. Trent Murphy, a huge reason why. Many would consider him to be a great college football player, but not necessarily the kind of guy that transitions to the NFL.
Well, that's the big knock on him. I mean, he's going to have to switch over to that outside linebacker role. But, in a 3-4 defense, that outside linebacker is often asked to drop into coverage. And he's a lanky, tall guy. I think he's going to get tangled up out there trying to drop in coverage. I don't like the pick. I wasn't a Murphy fan for the reasons you've already expressed. Maybe I would have looked at him in the 3rd round. So I think that Washington's reaching a little bit for a guy who was a better college player than he will be a pro.
Green Bay Packers come in at pick 48, and this is kind of where I stop. I'm trying to track the recent picks since we jumped on here, so take it away from there with the Green Bay Packers at 48.
I have Baltimore at 48. Is that not what you show?
Okay. Tell me what you've got, because what you've got, I'm just starting to look these up. So.
Okay, well, that's fine, and we'll stop here because this is halfway through the 2nd round, Mark. But with the 48th pick, Baltimore took Timmy Jernigan from Florida State. This guy is kind of Baltimore needs a nose tackle as well. This guy is like your mini nose tackle. He has nose tackle tendencies, maybe a little bit smaller body than you normally look for in a nose tackle. It's great value, I think, getting him there because some people were talking about him as a fringe 1st rounder, but can't really argue with that pick.
Timmy Jernigan was close to stardom in college football. He really hit his stride the back half of 2013. If he would have stuck around, he would have been just such an explosive player and a great player in college football this next season. He had an exceptional national championship game considering going up against the top rushing attack in college football. It just amazes me in this day and age now we have guys that don't mind coming out and possibly dropping to the 4th, 5th round. I know we're only in the 2nd round, but we will have instances where juniors come out and they are the 150th pick in the NFL draft, and they're okay with that. But that's the day and age in which we live.
Well, Mark, look, I'm looking forward to the second half of the 2nd round because, as I said earlier, this is where I think you find your best value any year, particularly this year. So we'll check back with you in just a little while.